As a fan that wanted to know about your journey to get into the wrestling world and who your mentors were when you started your managing career.
Oh, well, when I was, a photographer and stuff, back at then, I was, 6'2" and, 142 pounds, so I had no aspirations of being a wrestler at all, but I always wanted to be a manager. That's who the guys that I really gravitated to. And especially like Abdullah Farouk, Ernie Roth, he was a good friend, since I was a kid. And, when I was the photographer for, Detroit's Big Time Wrestling, he knew, that that's what I wanted to do. Also, another good friend, Bobby Heenan, he knew that I wanted to be a manager. Also, I was always around George Cannon and always going over his house and, helping him on, with his promotion and just other stuff, just sitting around listening, at his poolside in the summertime, listening to Detroit Tiger games and just laughing and telling stories. So those were the three guys: Ernie Roth, Bobby Heenan, and George Cannon. And what they really did for me was uh, Ernie Roth, really told me that, to wait, because when you're managing, you have to get the guys that you're managing, you have to get them over. And the way to get them over is with a good promo, because with a good promo, that's the way you get fans into the seats. So he taught me the art of the promo. What to say, just be ridiculous, but sometimes it's like, say things to the fans that it's hard for them to believe that you can even do that. And when you do that, that's what draws them in. Bobby Heenan taught me how to do bumps. There'd be times, show me, how to take a fall, how to not to hurt yourself and how to go with, say like a body slam or, he taught me how to go upside down in the corner. That's one of the best things he ever taught me because I did that all the time. And then George Cannon, he influenced on me, when you're a manager outside the ring, the focus should not be on you. It should be on the match. And, as a manager, you have to pick your spots when to do things, like when to hand, somebody a foreign object or pretend to, when to pull trunks or grab a boot, to help your guy, when to, if the opponent is outside the ring, how to stalk them, when to stalk them, if you should kick them or not. It's the psychology, of a wrestling manager outside the ring. That's what George taught me. So those were my three mentors.
Did the Sheik give you any advice on what to do in fan attack situations since he was, I guess, the most attacked wrestler in the history of wrestling?
Uh, about the only thing he ever taught me, and it's like I learned, when I started my career, there's going to be times that you're going to, get the fans ire. You may start a riot. You never know. And I've started a few. But the first thing and foremost, you never run. If you run, they're going to try to, follow you, and get you. You don't show fear. You may take the brunt of it sometimes, which I did too many times, and that as a heel. Uh, don't run, don't show fear. If something happens, just roll with it. When, it's hard for people to understand, how you don't react to when you get punched, kicked, batteries thrown at you. I've been stabbed once, piss thrown on you, spit at, just every kind of vile thing that a wrestling fan who hates you, that they can do. But then again, it's like, that's your job. So if you rile them that much to, make them react like that, I guess you did your job.
Now, it's happened in recent years, both in AEW and WWE, where fans have hurt wrestlers' feelings. I know Sami Zayn in WWE had a fan throw out, and it was recently a lady wrestler for AEW in Edmonton. Could you imagine what the Sheik would say? Like, if would a fan ever be able to hurt his feelings, or would he even care what a fan said after all the attacks that he's had?
Oh God. Yeah, I mean, he can write probably an encyclopedia on things that he's heard from fans, you know, inside the ring and outside the ring. And also, what's happened to him, both inside and outside the ring. Like I said, he can write an encyclopedia on it. He was probably to this day, he had to be the most hated heel in the history of the wrestling business. So what goes with that, just like all fairs in love and war, and the fans probably gave it to him more than any wrestler in the history.
Yeah, that's the one thing I like about that generation of wrestlers, because even now, today, we've seen Dustin Rhodes come out about AEW. Just enjoy the product, stop being so critical. Well, isn't the whole fun of wrestling, did it used to be you could just say whatever you wanted, and it would be like an escape, and you could just get all your frustrations out, and you didn't really have to worry about repercussions or anything. I don't know, it just seems to have changed to me.
Of course. Like you said, these guys get their feelings hurt because, fans are criticizing what they do in the ring or the way they look, like Chris Jericho. I see, stuff online on, oh boy, he's put on some weight and he looks like an old man and his hair is turning gray. Well, it happens to, everybody, in the wrestling business in a way. You get older, you can't help but, lose that, muscle, content that your body once had. You know, the, you know, it's just so different now than what it used to be. I mean, I always look at it this way in, the wrestling business these days compared to, my time in the older days, is that we had characters. Every wrestler, 90% were characters. You had the cowboys, the Indians, the Arabs, and, the midgets. You had the Germans, you had the Japanese, and everybody, the heels, especially, the Japanese or the German heels or the, Arabs, they were always hated. Cowboys, were always loved. Indians, it could go either way. Which, today's wrestling, you don't have that. You got, guys with, just their name changed. That's it. And you don't know if they're a baby face or heel, even if there are a baby face or a heel, you don't know what they are, so there's, today's wrestling fans, that's what they're used to. That's what they love. But if they research and go back and look at some of the characters that used to be, in the wrestling game, I think it would change their mind, and, it may turn them off to some of the wrestling today. But then again, it would give them an appreciation for the evolution of wrestling, over time.
Yeah, and I don't really feel bad for Jericho getting fat shamed because he's making like 6 million a year, I hear. So I think that
Yeah.
overcompensates for it. I did hear Violent J though, speaking of wrestling when you get older, from Insane Clown Posse recently doing an interview saying that he saw he was on a card with the Sheik and Bobo when they were later in years. And I was surprised to hear that they were still wrestling each other in the 90s. Do they probably hold the record for most times wrestled of any pairing of opponents?
If it's not, it's got to be up there. It's got to be up there with, that, and maybe Bruno and Kowalski, Fred Blassie and John Tolis, uh let's see, Dory Funk Jr. and Jack Briscoe, but none of them hold a candle, to the Sheik and Bobo, not that I can think of.
Now, is Violent J exaggerating when he says that it looked like, I forget if it was the Sheik or Bobo, but they had someone walking with them to the ring to actually help them on their way to the ring, that they would have been that broken down towards later years, or would he have been exaggerating?
Oh no, you wouldn't be exaggerating. The one thing with the Sheik is that wherever he appeared, I mean, when he was in Detroit and Toronto, it was always he had Abdullah Farouk. He was Abdullah Farouk wasn't going to be a protector by no means, but he had a manager. And then when he would be in Montreal and Detroit, he always had Eddie Creechman. Uh, other than, and then, later years he had me, and I wasn't going to be a protector by no means either. But when he would appear on shows, just say in Nashville, Louisville, Atlanta, those kind of cities, he would have like a guy like Mike Lauren, excuse me, or somebody else, like he had Gary Hart when he went down to Texas. They were like protectors, just to try to, Sheik didn't want to walk to the ring on his own. He had his ways of dealing with fans if that happened. But yeah, he always had somebody by his side to help.
Yeah, speaking of Louisville, I heard Jim Cornette say, and you probably saw this clip too, that one of his memories was the Sheik coming to a show late and his entrance into the arena, walking to the dressing room during one of the preliminary matches, just kind of stole the show and was his main memory of the show, just seeing him pull up in the limo and just how everyone's attention was turned. Oh my God, it's the Sheik coming into a building. What could you tell us a little bit about that aura that he had?
Oh yeah, I remember that very well. Just because this had been years after Big Time Wrestling had folded in 1980, and I think what the one Cornette is talking about was 1986, 1987, where the Sheik was on one of the shows, and Sheik knowing where he always parked his limo, they opened up the rear door to Cobo Arena and let his car come in, and probably on purpose, he had the car come in view of the fans, and when he got out of the limo, fans, all the attention went to him. They weren't even watching what was going on in the ring anymore. And that was the story behind that one. Yeah, he had a mystique wherever he went. Just walking into the arena, fans went nuts about it. Leaving the arena, same thing. You know, uh, I always say from his ring entrance, as soon as he came out of that tunnel or a dressing room door, the fans just went nuts right off the bat. And he had his rituals of, taking his time, walking to the ring, scanning the crowd, walking, like we said, he could just make a gesture or a jerk or, eye contact with, some bullies in the front row or something like that. And they'd scatter like cockroaches. And then he had his, prayer ritual, so, before the bouts even started with the Sheik, he had those fans drawn in, to him, like nobody else in history.
How do you think Saudi Arabia would have reacted to him now that we see that Royal Rumble's coming there in 2026? They're throwing so much money at wrestling, but do you think a character like the Sheik would be as much of a heel over in the Middle East, or would they kind of look at him differently?
That'd be very interesting to see. Uh, I don't know. You know, he was a great, kind of guy behind the scene. I don't know if they would, approve of his gimmick, to start with. Um, but if he, intermingled with them, they would see the kind of guy that he was. And more than anything, he would have drawn them money. So they would have been happy.
And I love how he was always called the Noble Sheik. When did they start calling him the Noble Sheik? Because it just gave him that other element of like a person, of like a majestic type person.
Oh, that came about back in the early 50s when he was on the Duma network in Chicago. The announcers, you know, they played along with his gimmick and said that he was royalty, that came from Syria. A wealthy family came to the United States to get an education and to get into the wrestling business and get rid of all the evil that was in the wrestling business at that time. So they had a lot of names for him. The Exalted Sheik, the Noble Sheik. Just as long as they called him the Sheik, I don't think he cared.
The doctor wants to know what was his favorite food to eat on the road.
Oh, lamb. I would say lamb. If he can get it, it's like after a Kobo show, and I was lucky, a few times that I would, be invited with him, Bob Finnegan, his wife Joyce, Mike Lauren, Jesse Ortega, his little inner circle. We used to always go to the Grecian Gardens in Greektown in Detroit. So, I was lucky, and he always had lamb and rice, every time that I've seen him, eat it there. And, on the road, sometimes you'd stop at like one of those Sizzler or Ponderosa Steakhouse, and he'd always get a steak. Those places didn't have lamb, so he was a meat eater. But I think his favorite dish would have been lamb.
Can you describe to us what it's like walking into a Ponderosa steakhouse with the Sheik?
Uh, you felt safe, with all these other guys around him. You knew the fans, if they recognized them, they weren't going to come to the table and ask for an autograph or anything. But, anytime you were in the presence of the Sheik, you felt like, you were like, on cloud nine, being in his presence, being with him. He always paid for, all the dinners and lunches. I've never had to put out a penny, when I was with him for any kind of food or anything. He was just a wonderful kind of guy, that a lot of people didn't see that side of him.
What type of things would he talk about? Was he the type that's kind of like me, that's obsessed with wrestling and the business and would always be talking business, or was there other stuff he would talk about, like sports or world news or stuff like that?
When I would be with him, at certain times when here, I'll bring up one. It was the day before his son's wedding. We were in Williamston, Michigan, and I was going up there to, photograph the wedding ceremony and, the reception for them as a gift. And the night before, they had a bachelor party, for Eddie Farhat Jr., some of the boys and Terry Sullivan and Bob Finnegan, Chuck Allen, those guys went to a bachelor party. The Sheik didn't go. And I didn't go either because I wasn't old enough to go to like a bar or anything. I think at that time I was only 16, 17. So I stayed back with the Sheik, and me and him went to the bridal shower the night before the wedding, and it was, it was just all the ladies, Sheik's wife, Joyce, she threw that for her, daughter-in-law. And it was just all the ladies and, a lot of, Sheik's, inner circle and relatives and stuff. And it was all the ladies. And me and him just sat there and, we talked anything but wrestling. He was asking me about my education and school, and if I planned on going to college, my home life. And we really bonded over that kind of stuff because I had mentioned to him that he had been to my family home before. And he, was bedazzled. What do how would I have been at your family home? And it's because at the years before, he was very good friends with Leaping Larry Shane. They worked down in Texas together, and Larry Shane, before he passed away in '64, he was going to be an integral part of Sheik's promotion when he bought the promotion. But Leaping Larry Shane lived upstairs from my parents. My parents had a 2-story home in the east side of Detroit, and Larry and his wife and his baby daughter at the time moved upstairs for a short time. And at some point in time, the Sheik would had been at Larry's home, or at his flat above. And it's like, we talked about that and his relationship with Larry, and and he had no idea that I knew Leaping Larry Shane, and that's how I got involved in the whole wrestling thing, was by him, my neighbor upstairs.
Someone would like to know, what is the craziest thing you've seen in wrestling, in or outside of the ring? And this could go with the Sheik or not, just wrestling in general.
Oh God, there's just so many. That's going to be hard to pin one down. I mean, things, man, it's hard. Everything
Was it the guy crapping himself in the ring and then the Sheik beating him up after?
Well,
that was a great story, by the way, in one of our other podcasts people could look up.
Well, one of the wildest things is when Louis Martinez crapped on the Sheik in the middle of the ring. That story. I've seen, just some horrific things. Like one time I was in Boston, and myself, the Grand Wizard, Ernie Roth, Gorilla Monsoon, and Blackjack Mulligan, we were sitting in the lobby of this hotel, and I had given up my seat when the Grand Wizard came. So I'm sitting there facing these guys on this couch, and there was a ceiling to floor plate glass window, by the driveway at the entrance of this hotel. And this lady came in, and she missed the turn, and she hit that window, and all that glass came, tumbling down on these guys. Gorilla Monsoon and Blackjack Mulligan both went to the hospital and got multiple stitches. I mean, not 2 or 3. I'm talking about 30, 40, 50 stitches. And they still worked the show in Boston Gardens that night. That's another one. Things. Things with ring rats and different guys, and things that are unmentionable, that I couldn't mention certain names and stuff, but things that you see like that on the road. Every guy was different. Every guy was a character. The things, like Dr. Jerry Graham, the time he came to a party at a friend of mine's house, and it was like in the middle of, early winter, or, something like that. Or no, I take that back. It was late winter, early spring. And my friend had this, swimming pool, and it was just like full of moss and, just, thawed out. And Dr. Jerry Graham jumps in and goes for a swim and comes out, and he's like green as could be. So, you'd almost have to ask me on particular guys, because every guy, there was a story.
Who would have been the guy that had the most groupies, since you bring up the arena rats? Was there one guy in particular that stood out to you that had them lined up around the hotel more than others?
Well, I wouldn't say wrapped around the hotel like others, but there was certain guys that I can mention now that they're gone. Like Killer Brooks, he had his number of groupies, in various
And you would
places.
not expect
Uh,
that from Killer Tim Brooks.
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. Tony Marino, Killer Brooks, uh, he, uh, Ben Justice, he had a few. Bobo had Bobo had his number of gals. You know, and I found out in later years, Sheik also. I never saw it, but there was stories out there about the Sheik, and other women in different towns.
Yeah, I could see how, especially with how fancy he dressed and how world famous he was and all the magazines he was on, how women would love him, particularly in his younger days. I mean, I could see that, not to mention he's a huge celebrity in the Detroit area in particular.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, just when I was in my photographer days and stuff, and I'm in all the cities, Detroit and Cincinnati, Dayton, Cleveland, Akron, you knew who were the rats that were around the arenas, and who belonged to who, and who would just hook up with anybody, at the end of the night.
Do you find it? I don't know how it was with the Sheik style of wrestling because you guys didn't really have a territory like the Von Erichs that was known for like having very good looking guys. But like when I watch it today, especially AEW, it seems like you can hardly see any women in the crowd. And if there is one woman in the crowd, it really stands out. Was it more of a percentage of women in like the 70s and 80s than it is today?
No, I would almost say it was 50-50. It's not something that you really thought about back then, but it wasn't like a big, preteen, teenage kids, young, crowd. No, there was everything. There was younger people, there was, parents with their kids, there was a lot of older folks, there was everything from lawyers and doctors and factory workers and auto workers. There was just everybody back then. I would say that the crowd was split 50-50.
Interesting. Ronnie Garvin's biggest fan here, ATF Media. How far do you think the Sheik's headdress would have flown if he were punched by hands of stone, Ronnie Garvin? Did that match
uh
ever happen?
I don't know if they've ever, wrestled each other. I'm sure they may have crossed, down, south at some point. But, I met Ronnie Garvin at, I think it was the Gulf Coast Wrestling Reunion. That's where it was wrestlers only. No fans were allowed. And I met him there one year. And what a nice guy. Very respectful. Me and him got to talking, other things than wrestling. He knew that, I managed the Sheik at that point, and other guys that I did manage. But he was telling me about his, he was an airline pilot, and there would be times that he would fly back and forth for his wrestling stuff, but he also did commercial flights, so that was very interesting. Really nice guy. I really enjoyed meeting Ronnie Garvin.
Did you have any contact with Bruno Sammartino?
Yeah, when I was a younger kid, this was before I was, the photographer at Cobo Arena. I had a fan club called the Michigan Scene, plus, other people that had fan clubs back then, who I knew a lot of them. And I knew Bruno Sammartino's fan club president, Georgianne Orsi, but I think, when she got married, her name was Georgianne Marsoukalis or something like that. I never could pronounce that Greek last name that she had. I always known her as Georgianne Orsi. but I first met Bruno at 1969 when we had our WFIA convention in Pittsburgh. So I met him then, and then he came to Detroit to wrestle, and his fan club president George Yan came in, and after the show, uh, I took them in my car. We went to a Chinese restaurant, for dinner, and got to talking. And what a great guy he was. And then when he came in on his own, uh, for the Sheik, uh, you know, he remembered me and asked, hey, can we go to that Chinese restaurant again? So we did a couple times. And the one time that we did, the Sheik went against Bruno. And the story goes that, when we were at the restaurant that night, Bruno said, yeah, I'm scheduled to come back here against the Sheik in 2 weeks. He says, but between me and you, I'm not coming. And I go, oh, he's going to no show. And it's like, and he explained to me that, that night he was promised $2,000 to come in for the show for the Sheik, and he only got $800. So it's like, the revenge thing was like, he's scheduled to come in for the next show and he didn't, so, and then in later years, I would go down to Pittsburgh, me and my wife would go down there because we have a lot of friends, and Bruno had a house near Washington, PA, just south of Pittsburgh. And every so often I would go down there and, let him, call him and say, hey, I'm on, coming to Pittsburgh. Mind if I stop by? And I'd stop by and, we'd either sit in his backyard and, have a lemonade or something like that. He wasn't much of a big drinker. And we just talk and, relive, some stories and, what's going on with our lives and stuff. And yeah, Bruno, great guy.
What would you estimate his payoff would have had to have been in the range of to get back on good terms with WWE? Because I've heard like Billy Graham say, with all the heat he had, it would have been like had to have been enough money to put his grandchildren's children through college.
Bruno, he stuck to his guns, and I know when, he got screwed over, on a payoff, for big time wrestling, he ended up going to work for Dick the Bruiser, because at that time, and from 1971 through 1974, Dick the Bruiser was running a rival promotion across town against the Sheik at the Olympia Stadium. And at one point, Bruno Sammartino came in, and it was probably, for revenge. He was a name, and he worked for Bruiser in Indianapolis also. But I think it was a revenge thing to, go against the Sheik. Yeah, and I think that would have been it.
Yeah, because he also tried to be revengeful against WWE when he went with Herb Abrams for a while, and I think he also did some WCW stuff. But at least when he died, they gave him a good push at the end, and he got to have his Hall of Fame at Madison Square Garden, and whatever money it is, it was good for him, I guess.
At one point, they had him as an announcer in the earlier days when, Vince Jr. took over. And he also tried to push his kid, David Sammartino, which that, flopped. And then, they had the Attitude Era, and that wasn't Bruno's thing. He didn't want anything to do with it. And then, over the years, they wanted him to do the Hall of Fame thing, but Bruno stuck by his guns, and I don't think he really needed the money, number one, but he didn't need, Vince Jr., hanging over his head, like, dangling a carrot, and, wanting, to own him in some ways. So Bruno stuck by his guns and stayed away, and, I don't think any kind of money, would have, turned his mind, the other way.
And of course, as far as the Sheik's snakes that he used to have, as we wind it down here, were they actually his pet snakes, or do they belong to random people?
No, that was his snake. His snake was Kibby. That was his name, Kibby. And at first, the whole gimmick started in like mid 1974. The Sheik was having a big thing against the Mighty Igor, and the Mighty Igor's manager at that time was Ivan Kalmakov. So they had a big feud going, and at one point they had a match, and the Sheik threw the fire at Ivan Kalmakov, Igor's manager. And I'll never forget this too, because Ivan Kalmakov really sold it. And what he did when he got burnt with the fire, and like I said before, you really didn't get burnt, but he had sandpaper in his pocket, and he took this sandpaper and he rubbed it all over his face. And by the time he got back to the dressing room, his face was just like blistering and bleeding, and blood and yellow pus coming out. It was horrible. And I ended up photographing that, the next day. He had a show, I forgot where it was, but me and him, he called me up and we met, and I photographed him in a Howard Johnson's bathroom, of all places. He was all bandaged up and stuff. And we took these pictures, and I used them for the body press program. So, and then that was the whole buildup for down the line. Once Ivan was recovered, the feud between the Sheik and the Mighty Igor started again. And Ivan Kalmakov came up with this idea of, I finally got a thing that against the Sheik that can make him lose, and have Igor, win. And Ivan brought out this box that was like 4 feet long, handle on it, and he always carried it out to the ring, and even, bouts where, the Sheik wasn't going against Igor. Ivan would show up at this box, and the Sheik would be, oh, what is this? What is this? And then when they, Sheik finally went against the Mighty Igor, Ivan had the box, and he opened up the box and he pulls it out, and it's this snake. And the Sheik went nuts, he's like scared of the snake, And this happened, for like 2, 3, 4 weeks. And then, come like 2 months later, the Sheik is, coming out to the ring with the snake, wrapped around his neck and stuff. But it was his own snake that he kept at the, wrestling office in Williamston, and his name was Kibby. And every so often, like our announcer, Terry Sullivan, would have to take the snake outside and let the snake just, walk around the sidewalk and stuff, and, bring it back in. And yeah, that was the Sheik's pet snake, Kibby.
How many people worked at the office when you were there?
Let's see. There was Bob Finnegan worked there, Mike Lauren, Jess Ortega, Terry Sullivan, and over the years, sometimes, it interchanged. I think Buzz Benson, another announcer, when he came in, he worked at the office for a while. I don't think Chuck Allen worked at the office, because Sheik was flying Chuck Allen up from, Florida, to do, commentary and stuff like that all the time. So, probably about 4 or 5, 6 guys, and Joyce's wife, of course.
Would they have been on salary?
I don't know that. I think they were, I think they got their payoffs from when they wrestled and, ring announced and stuff like that. I wasn't working in the office, inner office at that time. I was, the photographer, and I was writing the body press program and stuff. So I never, lived up in Williamston and worked in the office.
How many days a week were they running when you were working for them?
Oh, 7 days a week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There was, shows in every time, like I said, it's either Detroit every 2 weeks or every week. Cincinnati was always on a Saturday, the off Saturday. You had Toronto on Sunday, Toledo every Thursday. Then you had Dayton was on Mondays. You had Canton, Akron, Grand Rapids, Lansing, then Lou Klein, who was running spot shows all over the place. So yeah, guys are working 7 days a week.
Who would the Toronto local promoter have been?
Well, Frank Tunney,
Okay, it
the
was right
whole
with.
Tunney. Yeah, it was the
Okay.
Tunneys, and the Sheik was doing all their booking for him back then. And he
Oh
was on
wow.
every show.
Yeah, I knew he was on every show, but I wasn't sure how closely he was working with them. But that makes sense.
Oh yeah, the Sheik was doing all the booking for Tunney back then.
Well, one last question for today. What was your favorite match as far as you managing the Sheik? I'm sure there's a lot of them, but is there any one that stands out?
Boy, there's so many, but I would have to say the one that really impressed, when I got back to the dressing room, the Sheik was really impressed, and it was the one against Bobo Brazil. And what ended up happening at that one, Sheik got disqualified, and I can't remember, what the finish was. But then I was complaining to the referee after the bout was over, and we had it planned out that Bobo came over, pulled the top rope, and I ended up taking a bump into the ring. And now I'm in there with Bobo alone. And, he got me, a couple things here and there, but then he gave me a headbutt, the cocoa butt. And I stammered around the ring like, some old drunk. And I, came right back to Bobo, and he gives me another one. I'd stammer, drunk, and came back to him again. And he hit me with the third one, one of those big ones. And I took a big bump, go upside down in the corner, took the bump there. Bobo comes, gives me a couple boots and stuff like that, and just popped the crowd. And when I got back to the dressing room, the Sheik says, I should have had you as my manager a long time ago. And that really made me feel good.
That's excellent. Great story. I appreciate all your stories and all the inside information. As you know, the Sheik is definitely one of my top 5 favorite wrestlers. Where can people follow you if they want to keep up with everything you're up to these days?
I'm on Facebook, Dave Drason Brzezinski. They can either do it that way, or there's 2 Facebook wrestling things. We have Big Time Wrestling Detroit from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and more. You could look me up on there. Also, another friend I'm a moderator on the Chic Magazine Archive out of Canada. You could find me on there. So mainly Facebook, and then I'll put this out there. We here in Detroit back in April, we had a big deal at the Detroit Historical Museum where a historian and educator locally, Tim Kiska, who has a Detroit history podcast. And it's DetroitHistoryPodcast.com. So if any fans want to learn, any kind of Detroit history, but he did one on the Sheik this year, and you can go on the site and you can see the big feature that he did on the Sheik's impact for the city of Detroit. And also I had the Vice TV come in filming at my house. I can't say what they were filming or who they were filming about, but everybody knows about the Dark Side of the Ring series. And come, this year, I think it's going to be in March or April, there's going to be a special episode on somebody that I think everybody's going to love.
Very good. Well, I'll be looking forward to that. That sounds really cool.
Yeah. And more than anything, I want to thank your fans for tuning in. Hopefully, I entertained them, gave them information and stuff. Hopefully they like what I have to offer. And, more than anything, if any of your listeners out there are Sheik fans and they still don't have the Sheik book yet, Get this book. It's on Amazon, done by Brian Solomon. It's the history of the Sheik from the time he was born, his family, his whole wrestling career up until the time he passed away. What an amazing biography done by Brian.
The one thing that just popped into my head that you might or might not know the answer to is there was supposed to be a unreleased I Like to Hurt People cut coming out, like I think last year. Did that ever come out?
Yes, it's
Okay.
been out for a year already. It's the making of I Like to Hurt People. It's on available. It's not on YouTube or anything like that, but it's available for purchase on eBay. Look for it. The making of I Like to Hurt People. It's great. A lot of old Detroit footage, some Sheik stuff in there. People, you'll love it.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to look it up. Hey, my best shoot interview of 2025. This guy is saying is with you. So there you go.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you to the fans. I'll let you just say whatever parting message you want to give here.
I appreciate you, giving me this forum, having me on again. I think this is my third time on your podcast. I thank the wrestling fans for all their support over the years. Keep loving wrestling. It's the greatest sport in the world.